Good afternoon. Welcome to the Labor Forum here on WRFG 89.3 FM in Atlanta. My name is Diane Mathowitz. I'm a co-host here at the program, retired auto worker, local UAW, Local 10. And my co-host Paul McLennan is here. He's with the Amalgamated Transit Workers Union. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diane.
It's another great Monday, another great WRFG program. And yay, listeners, I do believe you can hear us today. And we are very excited about that. The views that are expressed on this program may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG. We're going to have a full house. We have 4 guests in the studio, and we want to get right to it. We'll first do our labor headlines and our This Week in Labor History. Then we're going to have an interview with 2 members of IATSE, that's the stage workers union. And then we have 2 members of Disability Link here who we're going to have a big discussion, an important discussion about the Americans with Disabilities Act, and in particular the sub-minimum wages that are allowed and permitted and are legal for disabled workers. So please do stay tuned for the whole hour of the Labor Forum. Here are the labor headlines for June 15th, 2015. The Labor Forum has reported about the severe financial situation in Greece with the implementation of a devastating austerity plan demanded by the IMF, that's International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, ECB, and the European Union countries, particularly Germany and France. The loan deal required Greece to slash pensions and social services and lay off workers, creating huge unemployment and the loss of their homes for tens and tens of thousands of Greek families. In addition, labor laws had to be changed to benefit bosses. All this suffering to secure loans to repay banks whose high interest and financial schemes and crimes created the crisis to begin with. In January 2015, the Syriza party won national elections on the platform of ending the austerity measures agreed to in 2010 by the previous right-wing government. Over the last 6 months, a series of meetings have taken place with the increasing hardline positions being taken by the bankers and capitalist politicians. This past Wednesday, June 10th, the IMF walked out of negotiations being held in Brussels. The next day, the representatives of the ECB, the European Central Bank, also left, saying they would only return if Greece makes a €30 million payment immediately and takes steps to essentially eliminate its pension system. Now let's contrast that to an announcement by IMF Director Christine Lagarde that despite Ukraine's failing economy and inability to pay private creditors, the IMF will release $1.7 billion in July, part of a $40 billion aid package to the country negotiated and supported by the Western countries. The US-backed coup government in Kiev has also cut social services, raised gas prices, privatized state holdings, and laid off public workers to secure the support of the West. It has passed legislation outlawing dissent and promoting nationalist and fascist ideology. It is waging an unpopular and expensive war against the breakaway People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk in eastern Ukraine, which have rejected domination by Western imperialism, especially the US-controlled IMF. Now, turning to US labor news, the fight against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a corporate engineered trade agreement among 12 countries that organized labor, faith, immigrant, food safety, and environmentalist groups opposed, suffered a defeat in the US House last week. Unions mobilized against fast-track legislation that would have permitted only a yes or no vote, with no changes when the treaty comes before Congress later. In a complicated set of legislative maneuvering, House Speaker John Boehner introduced the fast-track bill with a provision for trade adjustment assistance for workers impacted by the TPP, which right-wing Republicans oppose. Democrats who support trade assistance voted against the bill in order to block the legislation. A second vote on just fast-track legislation passed 219 to 211, but the Senate-approved bill included the trade assistance section. In order for the bill to go to the President's desk for signature into law, both the Senate and the House have to approve the same bill. Without trade assistance, it is unlikely that the Senate would pass the House version. And with it included, it is not acceptable to enough conservative and Tea Party Republicans in the House to switch their votes. While the legislative struggle is unclear today, the fight between corporate interests and those of the vast majority of the world's people is. This victory illustrates the potential power of unions and community justice organizations in combining their voices for a common cause. And lastly, of all of the program hosts, staff, volunteers, and board of director members of WRFG, thank you, our listeners, for your concern, support, patience, and financial contributions during these especially trying and aggravating last few weeks, when for all too many hours there was no sound, or it was static, or interrupted sound when you tuned into WRFG. Countless hours were spent in communication with AT&T, our service provider, or maybe non-service provider, when not only our broadcast signal, but even the internet and telephones in our offices were down. We have our fingers crossed that the problem has been solved. For the last several days, every one of WRFG's unique and important programs has been able to be heard clearly. And that's a big yay. Because last week, you couldn't hear the labor forum. And so I just want to remind anybody, if it ever happens that we don't have a clear audio signal, we also are on YouTube, and you can always watch the labor forum programs the next day. Also, your response to our financial crisis has been so heartening, and we are making steady progress in reducing our debt. The station will always need your assistance in being sustainable, since we are deliberately a listener-supported and sponsored community radio station. But we are diligently taking steps to improve our financial picture so that we can grow and improve your station for progressive information and hand-picked quality music. And those are our labor headlines for today. We'll turn right away to Paul. What you got for us today?
Thanks, Diane. This week on June 18th, 1954, the CIA sponsored an operation that overthrew the democratically elected government of Jacobo Arbenz Guzman in Guatemala, replacing it with a brutal military dictatorship. In his book, Harvest of Empire, journalist Juan Gonzalez says, "You cannot understand the enormous Latino presence in the United States unless you understand America's role in Latin America, and in fact that the Latino presence in the country is the harvest of the empire. It is a result of more than a century of domination of many of these countries. And in fact, those countries that were most dominated by the United States are the ones that have sent the most migrants to this country." Throughout the early part of the last century, Guatemalan presidents faithfully protected the interests of the biggest landowner in the country, the United Fruit Company. The United Fruit Company was a U.S. corporation that traded in tropical fruit, primarily bananas, grown on Central and South American plantations. It not only owned all of Guatemala's banana production and monopolized banana exports, it also owned the country's telephone and telegraph system and almost all of the railroad track. President Jorge Ubico, who ruled the country from 1931 to 1944, protected the interests of United Fruit while oppressing his own people. He made all the Mayans carry passbooks and used vagrancy laws to compel them to work for the big landowners. His repressive government jailed opponents, but the U.S. government looked the other way as long as investment in the country flourished. In 1944, a coalition of middle-class professionals, teachers, and junior officers launched a democracy movement. The movement won the backing of the country's growing trade unions and rapidly turned into a popular uprising that forced Ubico to resign. The first democratic election in Guatemalan history followed in 1945, and voters chose as president Juan José Arevalo. Arevalo established the nation's Social Security and health systems and a government bureau for Mayan concerns. After 6 years in office, Arevalo was succeeded by Jacobo Arbenz Guzman, a young military officer. Arbenz swept a victory in the 1951 elections and vowed to take Arevalo's peaceful revolution a step farther by redistributing all idle lands to the peasants. Arevalo knew that in a country with no industry to speak of, with more than 70% of the population illiterate, and with 80% barely surviving in the countryside, ownership and control of land was Guatemala's fundamental economic issue. The country's soil was immensely fertile, but only 2% of the landowners owned 72% of the arable land, and only a tiny part of their holdings was under cultivation. The following year, the Guatemalan Congress passed Decree 900. The new law ordered the expropriation of all property that was larger than 600 acres and not in cultivation. The confiscated lands were to be divided up among the landless. The owners were to receive compensation based on the land's assessed tax value, and they were to be paid with 25-year government bonds, while the peasants would get low-interest loans from the government to buy their plots. Of 341,000 landowners, only 1,700 holdings came under the provisions, but those holdings represented half the private land in the country. More importantly, it covered the vast holdings of the United Fruit Company, which owned some 600,000 acres, most of it unused. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles convinced President Eisenhower that Arbenz had to go. United Fruit's principal lobbyist was married to President Eisenhower's personal secretary. The Dulles brothers were former partners of United Fruit's main law firm in Washington, and Allen Dulles had sat on its board of directors. On their advice, Eisenhower authorized the CIA to organize Operation Success, a plan for the armed overthrow of Arbenz. The agency selected Guatemalan Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas to lead the coup. It financed and trained Castillo's rebels in Somozas, Nicaragua, and it backed up the invasion with CIA-piloted planes. During and after the coup, more than 9,000 Guatemalan supporters of Arbenz were arrested. Despite the violent and illegal manner by which Castillo's government came to power, Washington promptly recognized it and showered it with foreign aid. Castillo lost no time in repaying his sponsors. He quickly outlawed more than 500 trade unions and returned more than 1.5 million acres to United Fruit and the country's other big landowners. Guatemala's brief experiment with democracy was over. For the next 4 decades, its people suffered from government terror with the longest and bloodiest civil war in Central American history. More than 200,000 people were killed, most of them Mayan, over the course of the 36-year-long civil war that began in 1960 and ended with peace accords in 1996. The vast majority of human rights violations were carried out by state force and military groups trained by the U.S. at places like the School of the Americas here in Georgia. In order to ensure profits for a U.S. corporation, the U.S. State Department, the CIA, and the United Fruit Company succeeded in taking freedom and land from Guatemala's peasants, unions from its workers, and hope for a democratic Guatemala from all of its people.
Thank you so much, Paul. An important history that cannot be ever forgotten. And I think when we do these historical events here on the Labor Forum, it's so often you hear U.S.-backed coup, U.S.-backed coup, and U.S.-backed coup, and then repression, repression, and war. So we are going to move right into our interview with our 2 guests from the Stagehands Workers Union. But I got this piece of mail, and I got to tell everybody about it, because we were talking about the generosity of our listeners, and particularly the labor organizations that are so often here on the airwaves of the Labor Forum. So I have before me a check from the National Association of Letter Carriers, Gate City Branch number 73 for $250 to WRFG I really, really want to express our appreciation for your support. And we, of course, are always supporting the postal workers because, you know, hey, they're our friends, they deliver our mail, they deliver our bills, but more importantly, they deliver the good news that we want to get from our friends and neighbors. Okay, so let's move right into our interview. Hi, Neil. Hi, Mo.
Hello.
Thanks for
Hello.
coming in. So, friends, we have had a discussion about, you know, the organizing efforts of IATSE. Can you say what IATSE stands for?
International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees.
Thank you. It's so much easier to say IATSE.
Much easier.
So we have Neil Gluckman here, and we have Mo, I'm going to say it right, Gibberto.
There you go.
And we're going to talk about this issue that we've talked about before, and that is, of course, Atlanta is the mecca in some respects of some of the biggest acts coming through here. We just had the Rolling Stones. We've had any number of, you know, people pay hundreds of dollars to see these performers. And what they may not know is about the people who put all that sound and lighting and everything together, what their working conditions are. So that's what we want to talk about. So, I don't know, Neil, do you want to start with explaining the connection between Live Nation and Crew One?
What happened was we, being the IATSE, we worked together with the workers at Crew One to expose the fact that the workers were being misclassified as independent contractors. As independent contractors, they were denied things like unemployment and workers' comp and taxes, all of those things that most employees have, and Social Security, for example. So they had no future. They had nothing but the work that they were doing. And it wasn't right. We went to the NLRB after we gathered a bunch of cards. We went to the National Labor Relations Board. We had a hearing in April of last year, which determined that the workers, for the purposes of the National Labor Relations Act, were to be employees and not independent contractors, and that led for them to be allowed to vote for representation. That vote happened, the company appealed, we went through a whole bunch of legislative problems. The ballot box was sealed, the ballot box was finally opened in August, and the workers prevailed 116 to 60 in favor of representation. So from August of 2014 until now, we've been trying to get Crew One to recognize these workers and to bargain in good faith for a contract for them. That hasn't happened, so we've looked at the people that use, or the companies that use Crew One, Live Nation, AEG, the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and we're trying to get those companies to recognize that the workers that they're using should be employees and are entitled to a contract.
Okay, so I'm going to turn my question next to Mo, because you are a stagehand. You are one of the people that put all that incredible equipment together and up.
Yes, yes.
So can you talk about your job, first of all? Because I imagine, again, for most people, you know, I was an auto worker.
Right.
People sort of assume that because I know how to put a window in a door, I know everything else about a car. So I'm going to ask you what you specifically do when you look at this huge set, which is set up before a concert.
Depending on the gig, is dependent on what I specifically do. But when the trucks roll into town, it's all of us who are there. You've got people that their job is to unload the truck. You've got people to push the boxes. You've got people to, you know, hang the motors that put all of the lights and things in the air. So there's different sections of you know, departments of work, and we just all come together and make the show happen. We put in very huge shows, 25 trucks, semis of shows. We'll get in the building, we'll start at 8 o'clock, and you get your show at 7:30 that night when the opener comes on. So it's anywhere, depending on the size of the show, from, you know, 25 of us to 200 and 300 of us, like in the case of Kenny Chesney and the Rolling Stones, which are the two big ones that recently happened here in Atlanta. So
But I'm sorry to go back. What is it that you specifically do?
I do a little bit of everything. I'm a forklift driver, and I'm also a carpenter and electrician for the stage.
Wow.
So.
Okay, so so let me make sure that our audience has this correct. The real issue is the negotiations with Crew One. Who owns them? Who are they?
Crew One is very much a paper company. They operate out of Atlanta, Chattanooga, Nashville, and Memphis. We did an organizing drive with the Atlanta portion of Crew One. It is run by a man named Jeff Jackson. He has either a boss or a partner, Ben Jumper, who is out of Nashville. Jeff and Ben pretty much run the Atlanta portion of, well, Jeff runs the Atlanta office. Ben is the overall head of the business.
Okay, let me ask another question. All right, so when somebody like Live Nation and these other, I don't know, booking
Promoters.
contract, do they have a union choice? I mean,
Yeah, of course.
All right, but
They could come
why
to
did-
us.
Okay,
They choose not to. Live Nation in Atlanta is Peter Conlin. Peter Conlin used to be with Alex Cooley, the head of, I believe it was Concert Southern. Concert Southern was bought in a whole flurry of vertical integration that happened in the late 90s. They were bought by Robert Sillerman, who created SFX. SFX was in turn bought by Clear Channel. Clear Channel then spun off the rock and roll into Live Nation. So that's where Live Nation came from. Peter Conlin is the local representative for Live Nation. So when an act comes to play Atlanta, Peter Conlin decides who does the labor.
well, let me back up one more question.
Okay.
Can the artists, can they say to Peter Conlin and Live Nation, we want union crews?
They can. There have been instances. There was an instance about 7 or 8 years ago doing Bruce Springsteen where Crew One was the labor provider, but when they went and had the little sticky badges that they get, when you do a crew, you used to just give out these little sticky laminates that you put on somebody that says what department they are or where they are. Their passes is what we call them. They had all of the passes written IATSE crew.
Oh my.
One of our people took a picture of that and sent it to the International. The International sent it to Live Nation. Live Nation went, ooh, that's not good. But nothing really happened about it. So yes, the artist can ask, but I wouldn't hold it above a company to lie.
Fudge.
Fudge.
We'll call it fudge.
Fudge, yes, we will call it fudge.
Paul, did you have I think I had a question.
Okay, so the vote that was taken, the 116 to 60,
Yes.
where is that now in terms of negotiations? Where do things stand?
What happened was Crew One appealed the verdict of the vote. They appealed the outcome of the vote, I should say. So the National Labor Relations Board did an investigation. The vote was upheld on appeal. So Crew One turned around and now has taken the case to federal court. They're trying, all they're really doing is delaying.
Yes,
There's nothing there. There's,
yeah, but this
They're
is what
refusing
happens.
to recognize the certification.
they're refusing to recognize the certification, but their appeal has to be based on the things that happened during the vote, and there's nothing in that body of stuff that justifies appealing it. None of the questions that are there are outstanding. They've all been answered, and they've all been significant. They've all been adequately answered by the National Labor Relations Board. And without being able to bring in new information. The information that's in front of them really shows that Crew One has no standing to appeal this verdict.
So I'm gonna ask Mo a question. So here you are,
Mhm.
somebody who supported the union, voted for the union, and wants a union.
Absolutely.
And here it's been all this long time, and your boss, Crew One, continues to deny, really, you're right, to have a union. Now, has this, and like sometimes when this happens, companies, you know, up their pay or do something to sort of try to convince the workers, you really shouldn't have voted for a union, you really don't need a union because we really will address your concerns. Can I ask you, have you noticed any change either in the good side, you know, the benefits to the worker side, or has in fact they've been more hard-nosed about the work that you do?
Well, it's funny that you brought that up because recently, several people have been asking for raises, and throughout the entire legal process, we were constantly told we can't give you raises because it'll be seen as a bribe. So to fix this, our lawyer, what is his?
Robert Weaver.
Robert Weaver, put together a letter, sent it to the Crew One lawyers, saying, you know, this is ridiculous. We're fighting for better working conditions. Why would we want to restrict a wage increase for these employees when that's what they're fighting for anyway? So, of course, Crew One didn't come to us. I personally made a phone call and said, hey, so this letter happened. Can I have a raise? And I was expecting, I don't know what I was expecting, but I got a big ol' whopping $1 of a raise, which
$1 an hour? Or
no. So I'm now
$1?
so I'm now at $12 an hour when I work for Crew One, which is significantly less than every other company I work for in town. And so I started telling my coworkers, hey guys, did you get your raises? You know, I made this phone call, and it turned out that some people had been offered, some people had not been, and several of the veterans were quite upset that they had never received a phone call saying, hey, this happened, you know, thanks for your dedication in all these years. And by veterans, I mean people that have been with this company 8, 10, 12, 15 years. Like, you know, I've only been around Atlanta for 2.5 years, but, you know, so the veterans really saw that as a slap in the face to them, and the fact that it was $1 across the board, and the fact that these new people are coming in that don't have any experience, like zero, are getting the same as these guys that have been doing this work with them for, you know, 15 years and have, you know, and even some of them that stuck through Crew One through the entire voting process and even voted against the union. You know, even now these guys are like, really? So, so that's what we've got. We got $1 that is still well below what we deserve, and we're still independent contractors. So, really, that's just an extra $1 for me to pay the tax man.
Yeah, I want to make this very clear. We've had so many programs about this whole issue of corporations that have decided to call their employees when everything about their job is mandated by the company. There's nothing independent about them. But it does make the corporation, the business, they're not liable, as we said at the beginning, they're not liable for paying Social Security, they're not liable for paying workers' comp, they're not liable for paying into unemployment. And essentially the worker has no rights at all, really. I want to thank both of you for coming in because all these 15 minutes flew by. We have to have you on more because this, as we've mentioned several times, you know, we've had actors on now, we've had symphony members on. The whole cultural, I don't want to call it an industry, but the whole entertainment and cultural sphere. So many times the idea that people do this for the love of the art, which we all love, but don't really take in to consideration that there's literally thousands and thousands of workers that produce that video, that produce that record, that produce that concert, and that they need to be justly and fairly compensated, and certainly when they do dangerous jobs, which you guys do. If you're moving equipment out of 25 semi-trailers in the matter of multiple hours and getting it all set up, and it all has to be safe. I know that, you know, it's rush, 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 and that lots of times your health and safety isn't always taken into account. So I want to thank Mo, I want to thank Neil. We always enjoy having you come.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
So we're going
much.
to take a short break, and then we're going to bring our next two guests up, and this is another just really important topic for every worker, because there's just cannot be anybody who doesn't have a family member that is in some way has a disability, and that can be whether you got hurt on the job and then became disabled, were born with a disability, or somehow became ill. And we want to talk about the wages and conditions of disabled workers. So thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.